Treasure, it is a summary of the trip. It includes the delegates and their biographies, where where were we from various places in the United States, our sites of work. It has our itinerary and the various activities that we performed, the hospitals that we visited, and it has then some of the sightseeing activities that we did, because it was not all work, of course. But for me personally, it became a treasure because it has a record of our exchanges with our professionals in China, the questions that were asked, the responses that were given, and the summary of all the talks that we had by the various pharmacists that were on the trip, on the delegation. For me, it would be wonderful then to go back and see what we spoke, what we did, what we found, and then go back now and see how some of those exchanges in suggestions and questions and proposals then pan out through 25 years.
That would be very interesting.
That would be very exciting. And natural products, well, they use cat claw over there, and they use, as I mentioned before, peony. I cannot recall all the different names because they have different names for some of the same equivalent that we have, and I always try to find the equivalent name, so that I'm not sure.
What about acupuncture?
Okay, they do use acupuncture, and they use acupuncture in a variety of ways. They use acupuncture with heat, okay, where you actually warm the needle, or you can heat up, the needle through some device. You can stimulate the needle for stimulation of the body part for healing.
Do you know if that's still common practice in China today compared to 25 years ago? Is it still used as often?
I believe so. I believe acupuncture is still used and traditional medicines are used because physicians are still trained in both courses. Okay, you have physicians that can take the traditional medicine training. You can have physicians that train in the Western medical training, or you can have physicians that choose to do both. Usually the training is about 6 years for the Western, six years, and you can have 6 years if you're doing just traditional medicine. At the time, they had what they call barefoot doctors, and these were traditional medicine individuals that could practice in the rural areas, and the only thing that they could perform was traditional Chinese medicine treatments. They were not allowed to do any dispensing, and it was pretty much in the rural areas.
And while you were there, did you notice anything about women, the role of women? You mentioned to me earlier there were a lot of women doctors, pharmacists.
It was interesting for me to see that a large number of the women in the pharmacies, okay, the workers, the technicians were women, okay, the professional practicing were women. That doesn't mean that there were no men, but it just seems that there was a larger number of women working on the various fields.
Sort of like here.
Exactly.
In the medical field, as far as, the support people.
The support staff. And when we then moved into more so of the administration, you could see then more so men in those roles. But in the regular working, we saw quite a few women. And it was fascinating to have an exchange on how were their perspective in the practice, their practice setting. So that was very interesting to me as a working woman in the United States.
Right. And so looking back 25 years to now, would you like to go back and see how the changes and how the country has changed? Would that be interesting?
To go back. I would love to go back for two reasons. One, I would like to see what changes were implemented. For example, in the hospitals that we visited, they were in the process of expanding some of those university hospitals, okay, to new facilities and to new services. And I would love to go back and see in my field of practice how that panned for them, okay. From the countryside, it would be exciting then for me to see how these cities that I visit that were so, in a sense, pristine, okay, how they became the super cities that we have seen, for example, and the Olympics Beijing, I never dreamed would be so cosmopolitan as to what I saw in such a short period of time.
And Shanghai as well.
Exactly.
Shanghai as well.
Residents of the Miami Valley have always been led by their convictions to do mission work in underserved countries. Sherry Soliday and Darlene Craver have volunteered in an orphanage in China, and Susan Kramer and her husband adopted an infant girl, Abigail, 6 years ago, who is now an important part of the Kramer family.
Well, I've been to China twice with my husband. Went first in 1997, I think it was, on a mission trip. My husband and I, right after we were first married, went to 5 different countries over in Southeast Asia with an organization, and just did some mission work in those countries. China was one that we visited, and while we were there, we visited an orphanage. It was actually in Thailand, but kind of got in heart for adoption. And so years after we were married, we had 2 boys, and then decided that we wanted to adopt another child. So in 2005, we went back to China to adopt our daughter, Abby. So we actually pursued that route by getting on the website of Stephen Curtis Chapman, who a lot of people may have heard of, is an advocate for adoption, and he has an organization called Show Hope that gives grants. And so we went on his website to try to find an organization, and found America World Adoption Association, and that was the organization we went with, and they just held our hand through the whole process, and we're a great adoption agency to work with. And we did get a grant through Stephen Curtis Chapman's organization. There's lots of financial help out there, and I know that's a real obstacle for a lot of people, the finances, but if God calls you to do it, He'll provide the finances, and He certainly did with us in many ways.
And what would you tell parents if they're thinking of adopting? What is critical to integrate, especially an international adoption, into an existing family? I know it's not always easy. What would you recommend, or what would you tell parents?
Don't be afraid of it. It is kind of scary, but I think the open communication and taking your other children just along for the whole process, and being open to talk about that, letting them be a part of that, is just really crucial. Our boys love their sister Abby. They protect her really well, and they're just normal brothers and sisters, but they were excited about the whole process from the beginning. We prayed as a family about it, and they were excited about the journey with us. It took us 13 months at that time to do all the paperwork and the process to bring Abby home, and they were right on board and excited about the whole thing. And they have their moments just like brothers and sisters, but they love her, and she gets a lot of attention, special attention, just like moments now talking about the adoption, and people see her and stop us in the store. But as long as we spend quality individual time with our boys as well as her, and balance all that out, I think it works well. But she's from Chongqing, China, and was in the Fuling Social Welfare Institute. And again, all girls. The only boys that you usually find for adoption are those with special needs, have some kind of defects. But with the one-child policy in China, the boys are more highly valued to carry on the family name, to work on the farms, and especially in rural areas. So they're more highly preferred. But it doesn't mean that we really learned in our adoption process. It doesn't mean that the girls are just thrown by the wayside and unloved. We've heard many stories through our process of adoption where they're very loved, but because of that law in China, it's really an oppression of the mothers, having to give them up and having to make choices, and many pay high fines to have to keep, sometimes secretly, their children, and then are caught later. So there are some exceptions. China's realizing they have this epidemic now of lots of boys with no one to marry, and so there are exceptions. They found that they've made exceptions in the rural areas where they need more workers on the farms, and also if both parents are educated, have educations, then they will let them have more than one child. So we have learned of some exceptions. They're finding out they have a big problem.
How did you go the first time to all these countries, including China?
The first time was with an international group called Youth with a Mission,
Okay.
which is a large international mission organization.